Hello, everyone, and welcome to our second installment of Behind the Scenes of the North Texas Food Bank featuring our COO, Brad Stewart. We are so excited to have so many of our friends here today with us to hear about what the food bank is up to and how 2021 is going to impact hunger here in North Texas. Before we begin today, I just want to go over a few housekeeping rules. We will ask that everyone be muted. So I'm going to go ahead and mute everyone who isn't a presenter right now, just so we don't have any feedback in our recording. You are more than welcome to stay on video if you'd like to wave to whoever you work with at the food bank, or if you see a friend on, please don't hesitate to wave and say hello to them. We do have the chat feature open today as well. So if you have any pressing questions or anything that you would like to add, don't hesitate to reach out in the chat. Like I mentioned before, this presentation is being recorded, and we will have a blog post up on our North Texas Food Bank blog, The Feed, next week, with a link to this recording as well as any of the questions that we did not have time to answer. So please do not feel like if you have any question, we are here to answer it for you today. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and pass over the lead to my very good friend and my boss's boss, our Chief External Affairs Officer, Erica Yeager. Erica, why don't you kick us off?
Yes, hello everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us for our second behind the scenes session, which we reserve for our most dedicated and loyal supporters. So my name's Erica Yeager. I'm the Chief External Affairs Officer here at the North Texas Food Bank. You've met Cody already, and I will introduce you to Brad, our featured speaker, momentarily. But before I do so, I just want to make sure that everyone on this Zoom knows how deeply grateful we are for your time, your interest, your investment, and your advocacy. Since the start of this pandemic, we've distributed over 100 million meals through our partner agency network and through our direct programming. And we have only been able to meet this elevated need because we have partners like you at the table with us who feel just as strongly that nobody deserves to be hungry. We also hope to see partners like you on our volunteer floor soon. We had a number of pre-submitted questions inquiring about our volunteer opportunities, and I'm pleased to share that we are open for volunteers Thursday through Saturdays here at the Perot Family Campus and also out at our mobile pantry distributions. So we've made some accommodations, we've adjusted our numbers, we're making sure that folks are socially distanced on the floor to make it as safe of an experience as possible for you. But we also understand that some of you might prefer to still volunteer from home, and we have those opportunities available as well through our Cards for Hope program and our Social Ambassadors program. So information on all these volunteer opportunities and the ability to sign up for shifts can be found at ntfb.org/volunteer. So we know that we continue to need your hearts and your hands in order to fulfill our mission of closing the hunger gap here in North Texas. So speaking of that, we are pleased to be able to give you a behind the scenes peek today of what that gap looks like and how we are responding. My colleague Brad Stewart joined the North Texas Food Bank 2.5 years ago as Chief Operating Officer from Microsoft, where he held a range of positions in the Microsoft services business. So with a focus on managing change, leading global strategic initiatives, and implementing processes to ensure quality and efficiency, he really has been the right person at the right time for the North Texas Food Bank. He also has a heart for the hungry. He was one of the founders of an organization called Love Packs, which makes sure that children have access to food during the holiday breaks. So I know you will appreciate his perspective. With that, Brad, over to you.
Awesome. Thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you all for joining. Behind the scenes implies just that. And you've got the operator, so you'll hopefully get some interesting behind the scenes elements in terms of what we review today. So we've got some slides to roll through, and we'll do some Q&A at the end. I've actually got a little bit of a video to show too that I think will help cast some of the vision for where we're headed overall. So starting out, just a quick reminder of who we are and who we serve. We serve 13 counties, about 10,000 square miles here in North Texas. We actually share Denton County with the Tarrant Area Food Bank over in Fort Worth. In terms of food insecurity, we've got a trend graph there on the right side. You can see that it's actually trended over year with broader economic conditions, and we were making some pretty meaningful inroads relative to food insecurity and the number of food insecure people in our 13 counties declining over time. We had come to talk externally principally about around 800,000 food insecure people, but you could again see the progress we were making. Then COVID, and you can see the dramatic impact that that has had in terms of an estimation of the number of food insecure people in our service area. It's a record high. And as we look at who are those people, one of the things we realize as well is that about 40% of them are new. They're people who have not sought emergency food provisions in their lifetime. So one of the things that's really pointed out to us is how fragile food insecurity can be in terms of the people that we're serving. A lot of times we talk about, it's people just like you and me who may be just a little down on their luck. It could be one doctor's visit or one car accident that sends someone into food insecurity. So the need is at an all-time high is kind of the punchline or the takeaway from this view. Go ahead, Cody. In terms of our COVID response, I think you've probably seen and heard an awful lot about that. I'll try and give you kind of more behind the scenes point of view on what that's looked like operationally. Of course, the number one thing is just the throughput has gone up. The amount of pounds of food that we're moving had to change dramatically. We basically have doubled the amount of food that we're handling each week, and we have sustained at that level. More tactically looking at it, we moved from what's typically been a client choice oriented model, which means that, our primary, I'll call it our point of sale with the neighbors that we're serving is kind of like a mini convenience store. Obviously with social distancing, we're no longer able to do that. So we really pivoted hard towards low and no touch drive-through service more than anything. And that was a pretty dramatic change. One of the biggest reasons that was a big change for us operationally is that we went from moving homogeneous pallets of food to now nutritionally balanced boxes of food. They're still on pallets, but the processing that occurs to move from homogeneous pallets to balanced boxes is pretty dramatic. And we picked up an awful lot of that workload, both for ourselves and on behalf of the network of more than 200 agencies that we serve. We've sustained right around 20,000 of these boxes every single week is what we're now distributing and have sustained. We also are doing a fair amount of that type of consumer-sized kitting for fresh fruits and vegetables as well, putting them in these kind of mesh bags that you might see from time to time in the grocery store. So some pretty dramatic shifts there. Also really operationally, we moved to a shift structure in our warehouse. We had been running kind of day shifts, 6 days a week. We moved to 24/6 operations. The principal reason for that was one that maybe you don't think about unless you're in an operator's role, which is redundancy of our staff. So we try to position ourselves such that if we have one staff get sick, that doesn't shut down the food bank. And so we've worked to keep people separated across 3 shifts. So you can think about some of the HR elements tied into that as well. And certainly our mobile pantry program was another big kind of retooling oriented shift. We had used that program, mobile pantries, previously for disaster response, but never in this type of a scale and in such a sustained basis. So that's been a pretty significant impact for us too. Particularly, you've probably seen on the media some of our larger distributions that take a tremendous amount of coordination, much more coordination than any type of mobile distributions we've done in the past. In terms of just scale, I mentioned the 20,000 boxes a week and the labor that goes into that. That was a pretty dramatic shift at a time when we saw and have seen a decline in our volunteer workforce. Typically pre-COVID, we see about 40,000 volunteers a year. That really dried up as people became more conscious of social distancing and had more concerns around just staying away from folks and locking down at home, the way that we all have been instructed to do. So that's loosened up a little bit now, and we're starting to see some volunteers return. One of the things we're trying to balance relative to volunteers is how do we make sure that we're meeting that increased demand for kitting while also having a great experience for volunteers who come in. So there's a little bit of a balancing act there. The National Guard has been here in several different cycles, and that's helped us tremendously. Obviously, they come in and they're really hard workers, and we've been totally blessed to have them here in terms of meeting the output of the productivity that we needed to hit. I mentioned too, we basically have doubled our food throughput. That required some additional material handling equipment. It certainly was helped by the additional shifts that I mentioned as well. In terms of removing impediments in the broader network, so the way we work is we tend to feed these 250 partner agencies that are spread across the 13 counties that we serve. And typically, we offset some of our costs by having them pay a handling or a convenience type fee that helps us to pick up some revenue for some of the costs that we incur for small deliveries in particular. Well, back in March, we made the decision to remove that impediment altogether, and we've not collected any revenue from any of our partner agencies at all. And to date, that represents more than about $3.5 million of costs that we picked up. It's actually gone a little higher than that, but costs that we picked up that formerly we had looked to them to help us with. Additionally, we help provide some of the partner agencies with volunteers, as well as some of the National Guard that we were really blessed with in the beginning in particular. Certainly, I mentioned we picked up their lack of volunteers too in how we are doing most of the kitting ourselves. One interesting thing too that scaled up quite a bit has been the community support itself. Erica mentioned that. Without the community broadly and the support and the trust that we've experienced throughout this response, we wouldn't have been able to do any of what we're doing. And really would have probably fallen quite flat. So it's just been awesome to see how food banking has kind of moved from backstage, if you will, of our community to something that's much more front and center stage. Certainly, we remain behind those who are on the frontest of lines, if that's a word, in our first responders and in our medical comrades. But we're just behind them, and it's been fantastic to see the community rise up and tremendous support for us as we're really working to meet this challenge that COVID represents. One last thing, just in terms of the scale itself, we basically have sustained our operations now at 130 million meals per year is our velocity that we're operating at now. Just a year ago, we were at 97 million meals per year, so it's represented tremendous growth. Going back one more year, I think we were at 77 million meals the year prior. So we've just seen a tremendous uptick in our ability to serve through the generous support of our community. Go ahead to the next slide, if you would. So great, we've risen to the challenge. What does that look like now? What are some of the challenges that we're now seeing born out of this ongoing response? It's really about sustainability. So we've got a relatively simple chart here that looks at year on year, where does our food come from? So if you look at that, you'll see on the bottom bars there, the orange represents SNAP meals. So these are where we help get people signed up for SNAP or food stamps. We've got a team of about 30 people that do that. They typically work out in the community in the partner agencies that we're serving food to as well. And they just come alongside to help people through that exercise. I tend to think of them as kind of TurboTax for working their way through the SNAP application process, because it can be pretty daunting. But you can see the impact that they have, and it continues to grow. The light blue bar there, gotta move something so I can see, is our retail operation. So that is where we line up relationships directly between retailers and their points of sale. So think of grocery stores and partner agencies in their immediate community. So obviously that's a really effective, high productivity move for the food bank that gets the surplus food into the hands of the people that need it within the same community without a lot of handling involved. The next piece is the green, that's the donated food. That's a combination of both corporate donations as well as individual donations. And when people do canned food drives in their offices, that comes in through that green bar as well. The gray is actually the federal support. So there's a number of programs that exist underneath that gray bar. We've kind of simplified it here. And we saw a fair amount of that kick in, inclusive of some FEMA support in the face of COVID response as well. Those are starting to fall off a little bit. But we're now seeing some resurgence. I think there's just been a lot of uncertainty in the government space that's been hard to contend with, as the demand and our throughput hasn't really changed. How we deal with the uncertainty of that highly variable incoming stream of food has been a real challenge for us. And the gap fill, the final step for us, is that dark blue piece, which is what we're purchasing. Historically, North Texas Food Bank has purchased about 7 or 8% of the food that we move. And you can see that that's grown dramatically. And that's fueled directly by the community support in response to COVID. So community comes and makes donations, financial donations in particular. And we're not sitting on those funds. We apply those funds to going out and purchasing food to meet that ongoing need that COVID represents. So that's kind of where we are. The question for the future is, well, that's great. How do you sustain that? And that's really where this uncertainty comes into play. There are a lot of different uncertainties. The uncertainties of the federal support that I mentioned a second ago, uncertainties in the food market itself, as you see the implications of COVID on panic buying, even in our grocery stores. Everybody remembers up front, the run on toilet paper, canned goods, a lot of the dried goods like spaghetti. Those are our staples. So it was a real challenge for us to continue to provide for our partners' needs in those regards, as we found ourselves competing with the for-profit grocers. And that's just not a competition we're ever going to win. So we had to find some creative ways around and through that. The third biggest uncertainty really is COVID in and of itself. How long is it going to last? We've built up a reasonable war chest in terms of the support that we've received in terms of both food and financial contributions, but we've got to make a decision about how long do we think we need to make that last for, and how much of a bet do we make on continuing to find revenue to support these bolstered operations. So that's a big guessing game and a big bet at this point, and it's highly uncertain. So thank you for engaging to understand kind of what that represents to us, and for engaging in the process around ensuring that we continue to be able to meet the need the way that we are. At the end of the day, the biggest challenge we have is we've demonstrated the capability to move much more food than we had ever dreamed even a year ago as being possible. So the biggest challenge is, how do we find sustainability around that with our financial model? So that's the biggest challenge we're facing yet today. Go ahead, Cody. Beyond COVID, I mentioned we've really stretched ourselves. It's been awesome to see the galvanizing mechanism that COVID has represented for us. It's been fantastic to see both the galvanization that has occurred between food banks, within food banks, and with the community, all centered on our core mission, which is simply responding to the need that's out there. Beyond the COVID response, we'll keep going there. That's kind of our most pressing concern, but we're in it for the long run, and we know we need to think about and plan for what happens beyond COVID too. One of the interesting things about North Texas Food Bank is we had set a bold goal to reach 92 million meals, and many of you probably already know we blew right past that. It's a little bit of a silver lining of COVID, if there is one, relative to food insecurity and our ability to serve. We blew right past that goal and are now looking to our new, establishing what is a new goal set for ourselves. So that's a bit of work in process. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But if you take COVID, hard as it may be, and kind of try and set it to the side, where are we headed? How are we thinking about being smarter and reaching more people? So we've been doing a fair amount of thinking and work with our board and with our leadership team here around what that looks like. And there's really three primary channels here that we're contemplating and building some strategy around. First is taking a deeper look at equity. We know that we are moving more food than ever. Are we reaching the right communities, and are we reaching them in an effective way? So we're starting to think through how to do research in that space, and how to make sure that we're being as effective and as productive in our efforts as we possibly can. One of the things that we recently launched this past year is what we call the Hunger Index. It takes a look at geographic equity. Historically, food banking has looked at geographic equity at the county level, and we did that for a long time. But what the Hunger Index does is it takes a look under the covers of the county at the zip code level. And we found that even in counties where we were really proud of the level of support that we were providing at the county level, we found pockets of food insecurity that were largely unserved. So it's just a higher resolution way of thinking about food insecurity across the 13 counties. So we've been deploying that, and it's guiding a lot of our investment in the community as we go out and think about identifying new communities to engage in, whether there are existing partners there or new partners that we might need to onboard. And we're looking at ways to do that beyond just geographic equity too. So that's a bit of work in progress, but that's one big area, is looking at the effectiveness and the equity of the services that we're providing across all 13 counties. Second is really how do we grow in new communities? So we identify a new spot that looks like, through the hunger index, that there's unserved demand. So we have this thing we've developed called the progressive growth model. So what that is it takes a look at, well, the data points us towards this particular zip code. How do we go dip a toe in the water there to validate what the data is telling us? Once we find that validation through maybe an incubation mechanism like our mobile pantry program, start showing up in that zip code a couple weeks in a row, see who comes out, both to receive support, thereby validating what the data is telling us from the hunger index, but also to identify who might be some potential partners for us in that community, so that we're showing up in a way that is collaborative with those who already are in the community and know it best, so that we're not showing up in a way that somehow competes with them relative to serving food insecurity in that particular community. So this model starts with that. When we think about the incubation through mobile pantries, the next step might be identifying who are the community organizers already in those communities. How can we invest in them in a way that helps them grow their ability to serve those who are food insecure in their community, whether those are businesses or other nonprofits, communities of faith, or even some of the government supports that might exist in those communities. And each community is slightly different too. You think about the needs that exist in an urban zip code versus those in a suburban versus those in a rural. That's really where we're learning substantially from the relationships that we're forming in the communities, and really working to bolster. So taking that progressive community growth model, it's not hard to imagine and envision how it continues to expand. You dip the toe in the water, you find the validation of the unmet demand. We make some investment in that space to support new partners or existing partners, maybe just new to us. And then, over time, if there's a sustained demand there, then of course we're there to help stand up larger investments in those communities, maybe even going as far as building a new brick and mortar food pantry in a particular zip code that previously didn't have one. So that's how we're thinking about growth, is through this progressive growth model. And then third, and this is really not fully baked and is new information, we're really starting to take a deeper look at how do we get the most ROI out of the food and the capabilities that we've got across the 13 counties. So really what that has us doing is starting to look at not just meeting the immediate need, but how do we address some of the root causes that lead people to be food insecure. So we're starting to do some inventory of what different services are offered by our partner agencies, those 250 partner agencies across the 13 counties. And then how do we tie together the food in a way that really can start to uproot some of the root causes of food insecurity. So if you'll go ahead and flip to the next slide, I'll just do a little bit more on this. Academic research points out that there are really three fundamental paths to food insecurity, or root causes. It tends to fall in these three buckets every time. And there's a lot of different scenarios that can lead someone to food insecurity. But any one of these can trigger food insecurity. One interesting observation about these two is that when they come together, these root causes, they don't tend to come together in a way that's additive. It tends to be more multiplicative, so that it's more of a vortex that multiplies the impact of maybe someone who needs some help with some vocational training and is also already facing some challenges with paying their utility bills. Those tend to really amplify each other. So while we're starting to do some work in each of these spaces, we find that our partners are out there. A lot of our partners across the network are out there doing this work already. So again, we're trying to sort out how do we feed into that in a helpful, collaborative way, with collaboration really being one of our core values at the food bank overall. So there's a lot more thought needed in this space. It's super early to be talking about it externally, I'll admit that. So there's a little bit of your behind the scenes beyond just the operational elements, but you can expect to hear a lot more from us in this space as we continue to flesh out what these strategies look like. Really, it's about going into these communities and finding who's already there and coming alongside them to bolster both our effort there to serve food insecurity and address its root causes, and how we help our partners be successful as well. So in that vein, I wanted to provide just a little bit of a window into what this might look like. We did a little video segment that we're going to show you next that really just looks at a pretty mature partner agency that's already paired up with North Texas Food Bank. And I think this will give you a little bit of a window into what the vision might look like relative to into this space. So go ahead, and if all the technology works, you'll see the video.
The attitude that we take at City Square of, we're not here to help out the needy, we're not here to help out the poor, we're here to help out our neighbors. Because if you pull your neighbor up, you pull everyone up as well.
We couldn't do what we do without the North Texas Food Bank, just in general, because one of the main entry points into City Square and the work that we do at City Square is through our food pantry.
The City Square Food Pantry is open Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Fridays from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. We serve an average about 270 individuals every day. With COVID, we've seen a big increase. So before COVID, we were seeing about 170 people a day. And now on a normal day, we can see over 300. On a busy day, we can see almost 400. And on a slow day, we're down to 250. So we're definitely seeing a big increase in need.
We're actively pursuing healthy and organic foods because that's a desperate need. There's a deep desire for and appreciation of healthy and organic food by our neighbors that live in South and East Dallas, even though it's not accessible to them.
So a lot of times our neighbors come up, and it's great that they're loyal up for groceries, but then like, hey, I have a family of 6 and I can't make ends meet with rent. Like, I can definitely put food on the table, but I need that one extra resource. And so we make sure our volunteers are informed of any resources that we do have.
They get to learn, oh, we also do housing, and also they do job training, and wait, they do health. They have a clinic just down the road. So we're able to provide all these other services to people that come to City Square thinking we're just a food pantry, and then find out we're a lot more than that. So North Texas Food Bank, first and foremost, helps us have a really good point of entry for people to get involved with City Square and understand we're capable to do a lot, and that's a big deal.
So City Square is able to put people, put programs, put things in place that will, okay, now that we've got you fed, now let's sit down and talk about what happened, what got you to this place.
With the pandemic, we need to focus on those basic needs being covered, right? So a lot of our program right now has been about just providing that direct assistance so that people can catch up. Once people have those basic needs covered, like food, housing, feeling safe, clothing, then you can think of other life goals, right? And that's the goal with all of our neighbors. Everyone we receive and everyone that comes to work with us, we want them to get to a place of stability.
So you can't future plan. You can't plan for your life to be better if you're not looking past the next meal.
Just because somebody gets a meal, a plate, able to feed their family and themselves doesn't mean there isn't a struggle continuing there. Just because you give them food, it doesn't mean it's they can end up homeless the next day.
We've seen neighbors that have been able to purchase their own home finally after several financial coaching sessions with us and working through different programs to improve credit score and also increase savings, because we know that it's a long process for someone to finally purchase a home, but it's a celebration when they finally have a home.
You see people who have been through extensive and severe traumatic events. You've seen people that have been in abusive relationships. You see people who were heavily addicted to drugs or didn't have their mental health under control, and getting to watch them just kind of experience more stability, getting to watch them create goals for themselves, because that's really special to be a part of that.
If you want to fight, I'll fight with you. It's going to be hard, but it's not impossible. So it's a holistic approach.
The purpose is to get them to a place where they won't be needing it from us. They'll want to help others that are having the same need.
When we look at City Square services, we're not just a handout. we're a hand to help. If we help people get self-sufficient, then hopefully it allows room for people who are not at that place yet to come in and get food, people who really need it.
Awesome. So hopefully that gives a little bit of a window into how we're thinking about our future and our future strategy. We realize we're in a really unique place and totally blessed to have so much trust and support from the community. And we really want to see how do we get the biggest bang for that support, those support dollars, out of the work that we do through the food and the convening of the network that we've already got. So how do we just continue to leverage what we do best in support of those partners that are out there doing this case level work? You know, one comment that really caught me in this video, every time I see it, is the lady who says, now that we've got you fed, let's sit down and talk about what got you here. I mean, that is the heart of addressing food insecurity. It's meeting the immediate need and also providing that hand out and hand to help at the same time. So expect to see a lot more from us in this space as we go forward. But that's kind of where we are now and how we're thinking about it. So if you'll flip to the next slide, how can you help? You know, it really comes down to just remaining engaged, purely as the operator, again, in this kind of tactical behind the scenes episode here. You know, I'll touch on the first item on the page here, which is really just connect us. As mentioned, our biggest real-time operational tactical challenge is getting our hands on more donated food at really large quantities, nutritious food. So if you've got any kind of connections that you could help us with in terms of our food sourcing strategy and set of vendors, that would be extraordinarily helpful. Please reach out on that. Beyond that, I'm going to turn it over to Erica.
Thanks, Brad. And we know those on this Zoom are so connected and have been instrumental in opening doors for us in the past. So thank you. There are a number of other ways to continue to engage. Financial support always gives us the flexibility to invest where the dollar is most needed, whether it is putting gas in our fleet of trucks or setting up a new mobile pantry distribution, waiving those partner handling fees, or purchasing the food that's needed right now for this elevated need. So we continue to stretch your dollar to provide multiple meals. Let's skip down to some of the advocacy work. With the 87th legislative season in full swing, we're actively advocating for policy that benefits our food insecure neighbors, such as a simplified senior SNAP application, reinstatement of the full budget for the surplus agricultural products grant. Your voice is an important one. So if you are not already receiving our advocacy updates, there is a link there where you can sign up, and Val, our Director of Government Affairs, will make sure that you've got the right verbiage and the tools to connect with your local officials to make sure that your voice is heard. After a year of uncertainty when it came to our signature events, we're excited to get some new ones and some modified ones back on the calendar. With our beloved Empty Bowls event we touched on earlier in this session, it's been reimagined as a drive-through event where you can pull up and we'll give you a box inclusive of a beautiful ceramic bowl, some soup mix, a loaf of bread, and some other goodies in there, inclusive of recipes. So not too late to purchase your bowl box. And Taste the Cowboys coming up as well, another event that's been reimagined at AT&T Stadium in socially distanced plots with a concert for entertainment. So feel free to connect with your primary relationship manager for any additional information or sponsorship opportunities there. I think at this point, we were going to open it up for questions. We had a number of pre-submitted questions, and I've seen them coming in via chat. So Cody, why don't you take it from here?
All right. Well, I went ahead and stopped the presentation just so if you would like to come on video to say hello, this is a nice moment to do that. But we did, like Erica said, we had a few pre-submitted questions that we wanted to be sure to get to today. Again, like I said at the beginning of the presentation, any unanswered questions, whether they were pre-submitted or submitted today in the chat, we will be answering those on our blog next week. So be on the lookout for an email from us with a link to the recording as well as a link to that blog post. So Brad, if you are ready, you are in the hot seat. I am ready to ask you so many questions. And with that being said, question number one. How, if at all, do you use data to make decisions around your strategic approach?
Yeah, overall, the food bank's on a journey to become more data centric. We've both in terms of our internal operations and externally. Some of the biggest things we're doing, the biggest one probably to date has been that hunger index that I kind of talked through a few minutes ago that harvests an awful lot of data around food insecurity and then positions us to go and investigate and validate the data that we see around food insecurity at the zip code level. There's more than 200 zip codes. I think it's 213 or 215 across our 13 counties. So that's one area in particular. That hunger index points us to where to make investments, not only in terms of food pantries, but also the schools that we go and partner with for some of our direct programs that happen there. Certainly how we think about disaster response is data driven as well. One other thing we're doing, just looking ahead to that future strategy as well, is we're implementing a CRM tool, internal tool, to help us itemize what are all the different suite of services that are offered by the partners across this network, and how do we best serve them. So we're on a journey to leveraging data in a more consistent way across both internal operations and how we think about driving our external strategies as well.
All right. Question number two, I know we touched on this a little bit with what is upcoming for us this year and beyond, but do you mind just sharing a little bit more? What do you think is the biggest challenge that we will face as a food bank in 2021?
In 2021, it all comes down to this cost, the food cost. As food costs go, so go the financials of the food bank. We're not going to find ourselves in any kind of peril. We're responsible enough to stay out of that type of a position, but it really is about sorting out how do we sustain the level of output that we've established and have been sustaining for the past several months with those uncertainties that I mentioned before. So again, the biggest element for us to solve in terms of that sustainability is we've got to get out there and find some more large food donors. Every food pound or every meal that we find as donated represents an offset of something that today we would otherwise be purchasing. So that's really the biggest challenge for 2021.
Now, this next one I know will be a little tough to answer because we have seen a lot this year. I know me and my team have been to so many mobile pantries and met so many of our neighbors who are struggling right now. But how has the pandemic altered or changed your perspective towards fighting hunger in our community, Brad?
Yeah, as a food banker, I think we realize that food insecurity exists everywhere. People who aren't doing this every day, it's easy to get into the mode where you can drive right past it and not even realize it. So I think it's really been a kind of open the eyes of the broader population around food insecurity and how prevalent it actually is. I mentioned the thought earlier around food banks moving from kind of the backstage of society more towards the front of the stage, and that's been phenomenal. We've taken on kind of an educational value proposition to the communities that we serve too. But I think one thing with COVID as well is you realize how fragile people's lives are, and how easy it is to trip into food insecurity. We've, as mentioned before, we've talked for a long time about we're all just one event away from potentially being food insecure ourselves. And I think COVID has shown us how true that really is. With the number of people impacted by COVID and finding themselves in food insecurity, I think a fair amount of the taboo that's been associated with people who are food insecure, I think a lot of that's gone away. And it's been driven a lot by how the community has responded to embracing people who suddenly find themselves in a position they've never been in before. So I think that's been really helpful. And, that's something that's going to stick beyond COVID. Is this, once you kind of remove that taboo associated with food insecurity, it kind of doesn't come back. So that's something too that I think has been a bit of a learning and a silver lining, if you will. It's hard to find silver lining in something that's been so dramatic and terrifying for so many and detrimental to so many families. But if we do look for it, those are probably some things, some learnings relative to food insecurity. The only other thing I'll say is, in my time here at the food bank, it's been phenomenal to sense and feel and see the degree of trust and support that comes from our donors and from our elected officials, frankly, too. And I was stunned by that moving into this industry just a couple years ago. I was stunned by the degree of support that's really out there. And that has just been turned up to 12 in the presence of COVID, and just people really wanting to help each other out within their community. So that's another learning, is that it's such a blessed position to be in, that to serve other people and, as a job, and knowing that when we reach out and ask for help from the community at large, it's there. That's something we don't take for granted. It doesn't happen unintentionally. So I think that's the other probably really big learning for me, and something that it's blown me away, is the degree of support that we find when we go out and seek it from the community.
Well, I think that you'll not be surprised then by our next question. Even though we have received so much community support and we have so many great donors on the call with us today, one of the top questions that we were asked are, what are our funding needs for this year? What is the most important funding source that the food bank could receive during this time?
Yeah, first and foremost, we try and operate in a way that leverages entitlements. So Erica mentioned some of the advocacy work just on the last slide we were looking at there. So if you've got a connection that feeds into policy and food insecurity policy in particular, please reach out to become a strong advocate in that space. Those supports are imperative to us. Hopefully you saw that in the one bar graph that I showed. When those don't show up, that's where it's a cash flow. It's a cash flow issue. And again, we're not in any state of peril right now. I don't want to paint that picture. But with the uncertainties that we're facing around the duration of COVID and how long the food insecurity impacts will be felt, that's really anybody's guess. We're hopeful that we demonstrate that we're strong financial stewards of the resources that we are blessed with, whether those come from the government or from foundations or individual donors. Just know that we only spend the money when we absolutely have to and don't have any other option chasing in terms of chasing down more donated food or food from government sources. But that really is the biggest question mark. How long do we need to prepare for our COVID response to last, bolstered COVID response to last? And second, do we have the cash flow to live up to that challenge, to the challenge that represents? So that's my answer for today, and probably will continue to be, at least for the next year, if not longer.
Okay, well, we have a few minutes for a couple questions that came through the chat. I really loved this one from Anna and Rajasava about plant-based diets being found a healthier lifestyle. Can you talk a little bit more about the nutrition team and kind of how we're making sure that the nutritional needs are being met by people who are using our services?
Of course. Yeah. North Texas Food Bank was one of the pioneers in terms of moving to nutrition focused, not just food pounds focused meals. That happened sometime back in the 90s. And at this point, roughly 50% of the food pounds that we do move are produce. An increasing share of that comes in the form of fresh fruits and vegetables. We're actually working to reduce the amount of canned fruits and vegetables because we recognize the value that bolstered nutrition that comes through fresh fruits and vegetables. So that's one big bet that this food bank has made. The other, and we're wholly committed to that. We have a team of 3 or 4 people who focus exclusively on our nutrition policy and how it has implications for everything that we do, whether that's our internal programs that we run directly, our kids programming, some of our senior programming, mobile pantry, et cetera, or in our programming with our partner agencies across the 13 counties. So they establish some policy, and we look to then maintain some standards around nutrition in all the food that we're distributing, and certainly educate partners along the way. The other element that I'll mention around that is it ties in directly to the equity work that I kind of signaled early on. The better we can understand who it is we're serving, the more effectively we can serve them. And whether that is through nutrition or ethnically diverse food components, et cetera, I think we've got some work cut out for us, frankly, again, behind the scenes, in terms of how we really understand the unique needs where food is concerned within each community and serve those effectively. So I think that too is a big element in how we might think about this forward, beyond just nutrition.
In closing, we are sincerely grateful that you chose to spend your lunch hour with us, and we hope that you are signing off feeling confident in your investment and your partnership. And ultimately, we talk about behind the scenes, we talk about the data, but at the end of the day, there is a parent that's resting a little bit easier tonight, knowing that they are able to provide food for their family. There is a child that has the nutritious food they need in order to learn and thrive and grow in school. And there is a senior out there who's not having to make a hard choice between spending their limited resources on food or a medication. And this is all a result because of you and your partnership, and because you care and you're providing nourishment and hope to the most vulnerable in our community. So with that, we say thank you and have a good afternoon.